Let's get going. Good morning. My name is Laura Braden Quigley. I am the Vice President of Communications at the California Medical Association, which represents over 43,000 physicians on all modes of practice here in California. And we also endorsed Prop 64 back in 2016. I'm also the host of Canna Convos, which has been hosting monthly educational events in Sacramento for cannabis consumers, particularly those new to cannabis. I'm so pleased to be here, and I think we're going to have a really good, candid, frank discussion with some amazing MDs that have got a really, really interesting background. For sake of time, I'm going to briefly introduce each of our speakers, but I definitely encourage you to Google them, check out their bona fides, follow them on social media, all of those good things. So we'll go from here on down. To my left is Dr. Karen Moe. She has over 17 years of experience in family medicine at the Davis Primary Care Network Clinic of UC Davis Health in Davis, California. She's working from the grassroots up and educating her physician colleagues and over 150 local patients on the benefits of cannabis. Next to Dr. Moe is Dr. Philip Ube, who has over 8 years of experience in family medicine and became a certified functional medicine provider in 2017. His practice is in Austin, Texas, great barbecue there, where he's able to prescribe CBD, and that's it for now, yeah? We'll get there. And focuses on treating the root causes of disease by focusing on nutrition, movement, hormone balance, digestion, and stress management. Dr. Alan Frankel has over 37 years of experience in internal medicine and is one of the world's leading authorities on dosed cannabis medicine. He's also the founder of Greenbridge Medical Inc., based in Santa Monica, which provides treatment to patients suffering from multiple chronic and serious medical conditions. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Sue Sisley, who has over 20 years of experience as an internal medicine clinician based in Arizona. She's also the principal investigator for the only FDA-approved study regarding the safety and efficacy of using the whole plant with combat veterans suffering from treatment-resistant PTSD. She also works as medical director for medical cannabis license holders in 11 states and territories, from Hawaii to Puerto Rico to New York. So thank you all so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So we are going to just go into some questions before we ask the audience for their questions, and just chime in and speak up on anything that sounds good to you. So first, I'd like to provide some initial context for the audience, because I know from my own experience, anytime I go to my MDs and ask them about cannabis, a lot of them just don't know anything. They don't know much about what I'm even asking, and let alone, what products I should be using, how I should be dosing myself. So what are some of the challenges and limitations that are facing physicians when it comes to cannabis?
I'll say the main challenge is that we don't get any exposure to this material during training. So many people probably don't realize that we don't learn anything about the endocannabinoid system, which we now understand is probably one of the most important physiologic mechanisms in the human body. But we're never exposed to that material during medical school. There was a study published where they interviewed over 200 medical schools recently and found that they're still not teaching this material. So when we're not exposed to things in medical school or residency, it's hard for us to then, try to embrace this as a medicine later, when all we've been taught in medical school is that this is dangerous and addictive and we should discourage our patients from using it.
And do you see that changing anywhere?
I don't see, public medical schools, if they're funded by government money, are going to be still really reluctant to come near this. We see public universities running from the opportunity to do serious clinical trials, even with full funding and FDA approval. They're running scared from this work, and so I doubt they would they won't even let med students rotate through my laboratory, even though we're doing FDA-approved clinical trials with government grants.
So bad.
Yeah.
You evil doctor, you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So if I can add something to the opposite effect, is that although there are a lot of limitations as far as government funding and all that, I believe this is a movement of the people. Like, one of the reasons, the credit I give to becoming a functional medicine doctor had nothing to do with me and my training. I came out of family medicine resident just like everybody else did. It was my patients. They were telling me they were taking stuff and they were doing things that was working, and I was one of the few doctors in town that didn't yell at them for taking stuff, and apparently that got me a reputation on the street, so more people started seeing me. And there's only so many people you can see get better from doing something that you would not typically suggest, in seeing the data, and even though it's anecdotal right in front of you, once you see it happening, you have two choices. This is the Matrix. You can either take the green pill or whatever it was and go back to sleep and act like you never saw that, or you can take the red pill and start learning more. I think the most validating part is that there actually is an endocannabinoid system. Like, if you really ask most lay people out there, if marijuana is just there to get you high, there's no system in your body that's designed to handle these chemicals, but it's not unreal. I mean, spinach has phytochemical properties too. Everything, food is medicine to our bodies. So why would this plant be evil? It's not the apple from the forbidden tree.
Right, right.
A lot of these issues, I think, started with the Conant decision in 2002, I believe it was, where basically the Ninth Federal Circuit decided that doctors may recommend cannabis but may not give any dosing or other detailed information about it. And when dosing started 8 years ago, I mean, that's when I became very active, and doctors were and still are terrified about the fact that from a federal perspective, in theory, it's aiding and abetting. So that has to be taken care of, and I think doctors need to be reassured that this is a very old law and nobody could have imagined 15, 20 years ago that we'd have dose medicine. The problem with even the single biggest problem, other than the lack of doctor education, is the lack of quality medicine. I'm a major fan of whole plant cannabis, and the movement, for the most part, out there in the country, not just recreational, but being recreational and medical are, I think, poor terms. We should be using casual and focused. And with focused medicine, it means a patient comes in with a specific complaint or several complaints, and there's a history to that complaint. There are other drugs that the patient is taking, and you're dealing with, although with whole plant cannabis, drug interactions are very, very, very rare. The P450 system in our liver is what takes care of metabolizing 80% of the molecules we ingest. But under 40 milligrams, and this is actually an important thing to remember, under 40 milligrams of whole plant cannabis does not have any significant liver interaction. And when it's taken—
Per day, 40 milligrams?
40 milligrams per dose.
Per dose.
Per dose. But it only applies to whole plant cannabis. The isolates, which are a huge deal out now, have toxicity because in order to get an effect from these very inexpensive, very poor quality, single molecule medicines, I mean, basically the cannabis industry is copying pharma at this point and going to single molecules because it's pure. But pure is good when it's free from contaminants, pure not so good when it's single molecule. So I think having these medicines, now if a patient brings in a bottle of medicine that's not helping them, I take a look at it. The lab test can look great. You open the bottle and it smells like hay or something. It needs to smell like cannabis. Because if it doesn't smell like cannabis, it doesn't have any terpenes in it, and probably very few flavonoids and other molecules. So I'm probably, in this room, maybe everybody's whole plant. But out there, most people are isolates, and I would avoid them if you can.
That's good information.
I think the barrier of that is doing the research. So, I mean, that's what's going to be hard, is getting whole plant and having it be a particular thing. Because even when I counsel patients and they go to a dispensary and they get a product, they don't know if the next time they go back to the dispensary is even going to have the same product that they got that they determined that they liked. I mean, you hope they do, or they have something similar or close to it. And I think yesterday people touched on that, where even though they give you all these strains, someone said that yesterday, there's all these strains that are listed, but there are really only like 8 of them or something. So, I mean, I think there's micro variations, but when we want to do research, it's really hard if you're sitting there trying to say, this is the thing, and this is how many milligrams of it you take, and this many milligrams makes it be toxic or not, and things like that. And that's how they set up research studies with double-blinded, randomized, controlled, and all those things that people want. I do prefer the clinical research, and that's what I've been trying desperately to get the people at UC Davis to help support me in doing, is that people used this. They were taking this morphine equivalent dose of some opioid, which was awful, and how their side effects were. And then they came and talked to me, and then they got something at a dispensary that determined that it helped them, and then this is how much morphine dose, or anything, or what other medications they were able to get off of, and they're doing so, and their quality of life scores. So even if we did surveys like that, and I know someone, I can't remember all the people, but yesterday someone said something about clinical research like that, which patients are getting better, and there's so much anecdotal Israel nursing home patients that are living quality of life, and the medicine toll is going down, down, down. And I don't know how we can shut our eyes to that when it's just helping people.
Right.
So that's what I can't do.
Well, and that's a good segue to my next question, which is, you all see patients. So what are they telling you? What symptoms, what conditions are they coming to you and finding that cannabis is benefiting them? What are you hearing?
Well, the issue, by the way, I would love to work with you guys at Davis. There are lots of products available that are very high quality and consistent from fortunately, several different companies. So, consistent products are critical, and we've already done, you can do, if a drug, there's a subject called number to treat. How many patients do you need to treat to show that drug A is effective? The number to treat for many pharmaceuticals is dozens to 30, 40. A lot of the statins have a number to treat of like 99. It means, or 100. So you have to treat 99 people to get one person's benefit. So pharmaceutical tablets, when they have such a low efficacy rate, you have to do blinded clinical trials to show that there's less than a 1 in 20 chance that this is just random. But when you're going in the cannabis world, if I'm working with a particular group of, let's say, 50 different extracts, and one extract or one product works 60, 70% of the time in a clinical observational trial, if it works 60 to 70% of the time, and that's documented, that's a valid study. And these are the studies that we are putting lots of energy into. And I've been talking to UCLA, and I would love to, there's actually other connections at Davis, but these trials are legal. We can absolutely get provided standardized medicine that'll be consistent and tested. Davis would test the medicines, but that's where we need to go, observational trials. They are just as valid, and if a cannabis product, or let's say oil, a particular molecule, worked 1 in 10 times, the number to treat of 10, from pharmaceutical, that would be awesome that 1 in 10 worked. For me, it would fall off my radar. I wouldn't even know that 1 in 10 worked. So it's got to be closer to, I think, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, or higher for me to even use that again for that disease.
Wow.
Yeah, right. I'll throw out, I think when you asked about what symptoms patients are reporting, I would say about 12, 13 years ago, patients started reluctantly disclosing to me that they were benefiting from cannabis for everything from insomnia to anxiety, particularly noting that their chronic pain, especially neuropathic pain, was doing well with cannabis. And I was very judgmental at that point. I hadn't really looked at the scientific literature, so I was really dismissive of their claims, and it took me years to be able to, finally examine the thousands of controlled trials that have already been published in peer-reviewed medical journals showing the benefits of cannabis. The problem is that the government funding, the bulk of government money has always been focused on looking at harms of cannabis and addiction potential. So the data is not that robust when it comes to, when Dr. Frankel mentioned that observational studies are valuable. They really are, but sadly, the government doesn't view them as valuable, and the medical community is very snobbish about, we only want to see randomized controlled trials, and that's mostly what we put credence on, our RCTs. So when it comes, even though we know observational studies are crucial and they're important to get published, but they don't rise to the level of what will influence people in departments of health. They don't influence then elected officials, because elected officials rely on health departments to make decisions. So, but we have to start somewhere, and if we can get more observational, I tell you, the biggest value of doing observational studies is just what Dr. Frankel said, that he can use real-world cannabis, products that are in the market being used by patients every day. What I have to use when I do controlled trials for the FDA, or I'm buying cannabis from the federal government, and it's a very low quality plant material that has been, you know, the University of Mississippi has enjoyed a government enforced monopoly since 1968. They've been the only federally legal grower of study drug for any of these controlled trials. So if they don't like your study design, they can just refuse to sell you study drug, and then your study is impossible to conduct, meaning any controlled trials. So this is a big issue, because you think about, look at all of the scientific literature that we have, and you probably wonder, why isn't it showing more efficacy? Why are these patients reporting these incredible transformative responses to cannabis, and yet the scientific literature isn't really bearing that out as impressively? And it's because one thing is we've been forced to use this low quality, you know, really suboptimal plant material. It's like ground up, variety of strains that they grind up in order to standardize it. It's augmented with stems, sticks, and leaves. So,
Some of it looks
you know,
orange
really,
online. You can Google
what's that?
pictures. You can
Cheech
Google
and Chong.
pictures,
Yeah,
and it's like a yellowish orange, burnt looking.
yeah.
It doesn't look right.
No
Yeah.
stems, no leaves.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think all these guys would
Sounds like
agree
baby food.
that, you know, this doesn't resemble the real world cannabis, and it's potentially sabotaging all of the controlled trials that we've seen to date, you know, from as far back as 1968 when they first started providing plant material.
Well, and so, you know, Israel's always sort of cited as a leader in the research, but I guess, you know, domestically, where are the breakthroughs happening? Where's the most exciting research that you all have seen?
The people.
The people.
The people. I really believe if
Oh, a bit closer to the mic.
it doesn't matter if there's a trial out there, if a patient tries a product that's readily available in California, not so much Texas, and it works, it doesn't matter whether they have data to back it up, they're going to keep doing it. So once again, the scientific data may be lacking, but patients are trying this, and they are going to figure it out, because they're realizing, as Frank pointed out, that all these drugs are not really working as well as they thought they were, and wow, this other thing is natural and almost harmless. Why not experiment with it? And it works, so I can stop taking medications. That's always a win, anytime you can stop a medicine, in my opinion.
I met with an oncologist in West Los Angeles this morning, who I've known actually forever, and he's been seeing that, and there's animal studies showing that if you give CBD to a patient who's getting chemotherapy or other drugs that can cause bad neuropathic pain, CBD, in our experience and some animal studies, is incredibly effective. So turning this into more of a clinical trial with them is going to be randomized. We're going to have one patient we're going to have a certain chemotherapy regimen will get CBD, and the other one is not going to be referred to get CBD. In the end, they'll find out if that person somehow got it, but you know, probably not. And the prevention of neuropathic pain treatment, one big thing that I think everybody in this room will be seeing a year or so from now, is the most exciting molecule is THCV, tetrahydrocannabivarin. And for various pain syndromes, there was just a study released that it seems to abort progression of Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, and most excitingly, neuropathic pain. So there's a lot of new stuff, new cannabinoids that are ancient cannabinoids that are being found, and these strains are producing amazing medicine.
Well, Dr. Sisley, what are you seeing with your PTSD patients?
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that when she asks about breakthroughs,
Yeah.
I would say besides the obvious, like using cannabis for chronic pain, for sure, using cannabis as a substitution for opioid dependence, absolutely, very exciting. But I think we have not had a new drug for PTSD in over 16 years. The FDA has not approved any new medicines to treat that. And PTSD, we know it's a really complex syndrome, so it has so many different target symptoms. And what happens is right now the way conventional doctors treat it is just by giving people a different prescription for each of these target symptoms, a new prescription for sleep or a new one for anxiety or depression, and suddenly these guys end up, you know, snowballing onto 8 or 10 different prescriptions by the end of a year. So I think, you know, cannabis offers a lot of hope for these guys, and much more so than the FDA doesn't look like there's any new meds, you know, on the horizon. So cannabis, if it, with one plant, we can treat the entire constellation of PTSD symptoms. That's truly, you know, truly exciting. And I think, I mean, even I'll mention 2 other things that I think in our study that we're doing currently, an FDA phase 2 trial looking at military veterans using 4 different strains of cannabis to treat their PTSD. One of the things I noticed is these were mostly like 30 to 40-year-old military veterans, all coming in on Viagra. I was like, what is going on? Like, why are these young men all on Viagra? And you realize when you look at their med list that they're on like 10 different psych meds that can all suppress their libido and erection. And so one of the things that we noticed was during the course of this 3-month trial that these veterans naturally just came off their Viagra and were reporting incredibly improved erectile function. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. This plant seems to have, you know, because it's so complex, it's got over 400 different bioactive molecules, and all of we just don't really know how to fully harness the molecular profile of this. And so but that's exciting to me. I mean, if these guys can get up, you know, we know that meds like Viagra have a lot of cardiac complications, and if we can find a safer alternative for these guys to be able to feel, you know, like a functional human being, and that's really important.
Yeah.
I'd say,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just say the #1 diagnosis we're treating is desperation. So many people are faced with all these myriad of biochemicals and medicines that have somehow passed through and supposedly are good, and supposedly you know that how that's going to affect that person. And I mean, the joke is, that I've discovered, is that they all work differently in different people. So we keep saying, you know, cannabis works different from person to person. So does lisinopril, so does Lipitor. Like, they all have different effects on different people. So we try these medicines, and I'm throwing out weird medicines, but they do affect people all very differently, and it's kind of a joke that we act like they don't, and just because they've had all these trials. And then the other joke is that so many medicines we use as physicians are not FDA approved for the indications that we use them for. So it's a complete joke. Like, everybody you know probably is on some proton pump inhibitor, which is the purple pill, omeprazole, next, whatever, for their stomach acid. And we really need diet and lifestyle changes and things like that. And everyone takes that forever. There is no indication for those medications to be used beyond 12 weeks of therapy. If you read the actual FDA approved use of it, it's insanity of how we use medicines, and people just do whatever they want afterwards, and why this has just been stigmatized and not used properly when it has so many excellent uses that we can get people off all these very challenging and gross medicines. And that's how I came through. And I'll go back to my comment of desperation, of it started with little kids and epilepsy, and how can you watch your child have, you know, 10 seizures an hour? Of course you want to get something that's going to help them, and it helps them. And why I think it's ballooned in the last year for me is the opioid crisis. And so they've come in and are killing me daily as to how I am being overseen, as to if I write an opioid prescription, the hoops and jumps and whistles and things that I have to go through just to give someone some pain pills, which I mean, there's some benefits, because we definitely have people on way too much stuff and it's gross, and there's a lot of other options like the football player talked about yesterday. But they didn't give us any alternatives. There's no alternatives to help people with chronic pain, and chronic pain is huge, and it's so challenging. So it's like they take that away and give us nothing else to help people. So I've just stepped in and said, I got to help people, and people are in pain, and this has worked. So that's where I've come in and what I treat mostly.
What were you going to say, Dr.?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, I have real concerns about the future viability of medical cannabis in the United States if either, I mean, Schedule 1 registration doesn't change, but frankly, even if the Schedule 1 changes, if there are not more doctors learning how to dose, and I mean, you can't, I spend an hour with the patient, and sometimes that's not enough time to figure out what their cannabis regimen is going to be. And as we have more and more molecules, more and more extracts, I mean, every time I'm having to think harder and harder. It's not trivial to be able to work with all of these and future molecules, and we need trained physicians. The UCLA, I mean, I've talked a lot at UCLA about this, and they seem to be, all the UCs seem to be, moving forward a bit. I think as they get less scared of the federal intervention.
Yeah.
But we need to train doctors. I'm not sure how to do it because it's, I mean, I hired a physician 10 months ago, and it took 8 months every day sitting with me to feel comfortable, even remotely comfortable.
Right.
And he still asks a lot of questions, and he's not dumb. That's not the reason.
Right.
It's complicated.
Very complex.
Very
it's so complex. Well, and we're used to having control, and this is something that we aren't very controlled over, and different people are so different with it, and that's what makes it, I think, really challenging.
And because it's so complex.
There's so many different plants, and there's so many different hybrids of the various plants, and then there's so many different delivery systems to get it to the person for the different things they're using it for, and it starts to get overwhelming, and we are used to being in control, and patients want you to write down exactly what they're supposed to do, and this is a lot of trial and error, a lot of playing around with things, and that's really hard for an 85-year-old person to even keep track of what worked and what didn't work, because they forget, and they need helpers, and they need helpers getting what they need to get.
Well, and then you tack on the problem of consistency. If they go to the dispensary and now that company's
But
gone out of
it is
business, or the strain is
possible,
different,
and it does
or
exist,
It does.
and exists in more
Right.
than one place, and every patient that I see gets a full, pretty long treatment plan that is, it's not a prescription because a prescription is illegal, but it still says how many milligrams
Yes.
of which extract have you taken, how often, and after how many days to send it a message and let me know how it's changed. I mean, the reason, I think you make a very good point that cannabis is more complicated, but pharma should be more complicated. It shouldn't be this one dose fits all, which brings up the other issue of why does cannabis, I've asked this all the time, why does cannabis work for so many things? This must be snake oil. And sometimes I feel like, yeah, oh God, yeah, we have had good luck with that too. But I think there's two reasons that I can think of. One is this is a vegetable plant and a vegetable oil. Vegetable oil has nutrients. This is just nothing but nutrition. It's obviously not life-saving nutrition because people can live without cannabis. It's not like vitamin C. We don't live very well without cannabis. And when people finally can take in that this isn't about smoking, it's not about getting stoned, that was my generation wrecked it for everybody. I'm sorry. But had gas chromatography machines been available 10 years early, or doctors were able to dose the extracts that they were, from 1860 to 1920, the most common medicine to be prescribed was cannabis. And the AMA was very much in favor of it. And it fell apart, not because of the law, it fell apart 10 years before the law came in because each bottle was different. It was lack of consistency that killed cannabis. Otherwise, cannabis would be the major medicine on the planet today.
I would just dispute the idea about dosing, though, because I think Dr. Frankel is an anomaly. He's a true, expert, a cannabis clinician. He's very rare. The docs like him that really understand how to dose the plant are unusual. And that's why our research is focused strictly on patient self-titration and our clinical trials. We actually managed to persuade the FDA to approve a patient self-titration model for all of our controlled trials. It took us months to get that because the FDA are all, mostly physician investigators who are only embrace this fixed dose model. They come from the pharma mindset that you have to have fixed dosing, and that's the only thing they can wrap their head around. But after about 6 months, we finally showed them that when you're dealing with botanical medicine, especially in our case, we're only using smoked and vaporized flower. And when it comes to flower, just as these folks said, there's so many different, hundreds of different varieties, all of them behave differently in different patients. You've got to let each patient start with the tiniest amount and go up slowly as they see fit. And one of the most impressive things about that I've discovered in our clinical trials is that we give patients, in some of these studies, we're giving patients up to 2 grams a day that they can take home with them. And these guys are required to return their unused marijuana each week so that I can weigh their use each day. And I'm finding that a lot of these guys are using less than a half gram a day. Some of them are just taking 1 or 2 puffs at night to help them initiate sleep, decrease their pain, whatever. And I'm just so amazed at how little people need to get that the efficacy. So I would say that's why we don't want to encourage fixed dosing. And I think that's the whole problem with all of the controlled trials.
I never said fixed dosing.
Yeah, but you said
I have a lot to
dosing. So
disagree.
I just want to make sure that people understand that dosing, that what's happening with the FDA is that they've always used fixed dosing for controlled trials. And over the last 5 decades, every controlled trial you see has forced people into 50 milligrams 2 times a day or 3 times a day. And that's part of why the studies that we have so far don't show the kind of efficacy that Dr. Frankel is achieving with his patients, because they're not able to adjust the dose based on patient needs. They force them to take exactly what they think, what they're guessing, and then they get tons of side effects and you don't hardly see the efficacy because they're getting way too much.
Well, I guess I can't fully agree with that, because otherwise when I die, what happens, you know? I actually disagree respectfully. I don't think there's anything that special about me. I just spent a lot of years having different collectives, never had any business relationship with any of them, but I wanted to be able to figure out dosing for cannabis. The only way you could do that is push the envelope on genetics. That's why I got involved with growing and extractions. And doctors, and this may be a radical thought, but I think that doctors should be more involved in the creation of the actual formulas, just like doctors were doing all the time until 1940s when things fell apart. The information that I have is logical information that I'd be happy to share with anybody. And there's the future of cannabis. I realize doing the FDA-approved trials, you need to use this NIDA horrible medicine that's not going to apply to, unfortunately, it'll give us some great data, but what about having data on how many milligrams of CBD, THC, and THC acid to use for myasthenia gravis patients? But we know that. What about THC neuropathy? We know that, and we're now proving it with trials. To me, and I don't mean this to come off as negative, but I think future trials should involve dosed medicine that patients who are ill want to use. Nobody's going to want to smoke something, and I realize that's all we have federally now, but I'm going to be spending the rest of my life doing observational trials on dosed clinical.
Help us end the DEA monopoly so that we can do controlled trials with the medicine that you're using. That's all I'm asking, and that's the call to action for all the people in the audience. Is we need to keep pressure on the DEA to force the DEA to license other growers for research, because this is completely insane that we're continually forced to use this really suboptimal plant material. And all of us as taxpayers should be outraged that we're spending over $68 million every 5 years to perpetuate this monopoly.
I think the work you're doing is fantastic. Right. I wouldn't have the patience for it.
All right, well, we have about 10 minutes left, so we want to definitely take some audience questions. Are there any? Yeah, ooh, right up front.
I guess I practice holistic medicine, and you're asking a very specific question, and how I come to it is it does address so many different issues, and chronic pain, just like PTSD is very complex, chronic pain is complex. We're finding more and more that many people with chronic pain actually is from childhood abuse issues and childhood experiences of just how they viewed medicine in their families and how being sick was handled. And none of those things can be addressed with a dose of a particular medicine. And why I think cannabis is so helpful is it gives you this holistic, the people I know are just happier and they sleep better and they feel better. And I know that doesn't sound very doctory, and for real, I work for UC Davis and I have a practice and I see patients every day and I sound really hippie juju, but it's like working and I can't turn my back on what's working. And then I will say, coming from the Central Valley of California, I was trained in Merced. It's also, I just want to put this plug in. I wish if I could turn back time, I would make cannabis be talked about more as food or a vegetable or regulated like food, and how we talk about spinach or whatever, because putting it into the pharma category is what I think is going to ruin it, because they are going to want to extract individual molecules and test it and ruin it and make it not be what it really, I think, whoever you believe put it on this planet to make it be what it is. And you can't turn your back on that. And the reason I brought up being trained in Merced is every Latina grandma in Central Valley of California has a jug in their house that has various plants, of which cannabis is probably one of them, and other essential oils and things that they medicinally treat their family members with. And I'm scared we're going to get rid of that and take that away. And as much as we need to, so doctors can embrace and use this. And I'm sorry if I didn't really speak to your point, but I don't think it is an equivalent, and nor do I want it to be. I guess that's what I speak to.
I actually do not think it's going to be the federal government that wrecks medical cannabis. I think it's us that are wrecking medical cannabis. Everybody knows that since 1996 in California, medical cannabis has been recreational cannabis. And I wrote once about the huge number of glaucoma patients and 20-year-olds in Venice, California, and that's when I actually stopped my practice for a while and raised the age to 25. But for me, it wasn't interesting until we could start measuring. And strain, just as a general point, personally, I feel that strain-based medicine doesn't work. What you need to know is how many milligrams of what the patient is taking. And that's why we're sending some of our extracts to Didi Mairi at the Technion in Tel Aviv, because they're able to measure things that we just can't even measure here, because the labs that are set up to measure that stuff won't allow any cannabis. So we're shipping it to Israel to be able to get testing results on it. That's ridiculous. But I see this, I don't have any data on this next statement, but I think pharma is now in favor, in large part, of whole plant medicine, because GW Pharmaceuticals just got approved and released Epidiolex, which is, by the way, Epidiolex is 2 different products depending whether it's sold in the United States or outside the United States. Inside the United States, 0 THC, much less effective. Outside the United States, they have like 20-to-1 ratio, like most of the products we all use. So if pharma does not evolve to better medicine, they're going to, I don't think they're going to kill it. I think they're going to change it. And the real medical cannabis that's going on now, there's not that much to threaten anybody. There just isn't. And I wish there were.
I think to get to your question real quick, the morphine equivalent thing doesn't really work, as most people probably know. I've done quite a bit of ER work, and 10 milligrams of morphine for one person is 1 milligram for another person. So there's already a flawed issue with that scale. and then to think, I think it was you that made the point that everyone reacts differently to the cannabinoids, the cannabis. So you're going to take a flawed system and then cross it over to another flawed system because everyone reacts to the medication differently. Someone may react very sensitively to morphine and then the opposite for cannabis. So I'm sure the research is going to come out where there's going to be statistics proving that go, this dose of cannabis is equal to this dose of morphine equivalent. But it's going to be totally useless.
Totally different.
It's going to be totally useless. It'll be a data-driven point that we all want. It would be nice to be able to say, oh, they're on this many milligrams of morphine, it goes to that cannabis.
The
but
other
it's going
reason
to
to
be
support
start low
you-
and go up.
What you say is true, that if somebody's going to be getting their next dose of morphine or any narcotic, why do they need that next dose? Is it really pain, or is it the more common thing, depression? So trying to get, you might with cannabis improve their mood more and then need less because of that reason. So medicine can't be, everybody wants everything to be in a box with arrows that are pointing the right way. None of medicine works that way. And it's a misnomer that we think that just because we have bottles with pills in them from pharma that we have control. We don't have any control. I mean, now that antacids cause osteoporosis, common antibiotics like Floxin and Cipro cause ruptured tendons. I mean, this is horrible stuff, and most of this, again, is helped by cannabis. One, because it's a great nutrition. Again, it's not life-saving, but it makes your life a whole lot better. And cannabis interacts, as Dr. Sicily said, with our endocannabinoid system. And as patients get better with cannabis, for the vast majority, their necessary dose decreases. It doesn't increase. And I think it decreases because you've had more nutrition and you don't need it as much. And I think it decreases because it amps up our endocannabinoid system.
I had one more thing to speak to, and I really wanted to get this in here because I know there's a room full of lawyers. The really big thing in medicine is they want to, it was yesterday, a lot of things with doctors, and this is where I've kind of put myself out there and decided I'll open a coffee shop bookstore if they want to take my license away. But I think we have to put ourselves out there. I'm going to go to morphine equivalents. The reason they have talked about morphine equivalents is there's a certain level that the doctor can be blamed if you're giving that much to a person because then they overdose and die, and then that's your fault because you gave them that much. So that's even why we even talk about morphine equivalents, is that if patients have that much, it's not about dosing because I have patients that can take thousands a day, and I have someone who will like pass out with the teeniest dose because that's addiction. And so cannabis doesn't have those same issues, and it does work very differently. But the key is am I a teacher, which is the root word of what we are? We are teachers, physicians are teachers, or are we gods that are gonna like come in and tell patients what to do and how much to take and exactly what's gonna help them get better? And we are held to that standard, and I'm trying to bust out of that because we want to help people, and people are out doing all the things that they want to do anyway. They eat what they want to eat. You give them pills, it's been truthfully studied that people don't actually take those pills. Trained in Merced, I went to Hmong people, families' homes, where they had shrines built of full pill bottles, and we would wonder why they didn't work. There's so many different things in medicine that we have zero control over, yet they want us to have all the control. And so this is just one more piece of it. Like, I want to help people find medicine to help them on all the various levels that I believe cannabis can help them. But our hands are so tied, and I'm amazed and want to learn so much from Dr. Frankel, but I always thought we couldn't say those things. I thought I couldn't tell patients how much dose to take. I thought that was part of the rules, and I'm very happy for Margolin's booklet, because I'm going to read that cover to cover, and I bought that other guy's book, Cannabis Pharmacy, because I'm like, I can learn all these things that are very hard to find good information of what we're even supposed to be able to say. We're not even supposed to be able to say this. I did this in this really underground way, but now I'm exploding because all the patients are coming to me. I do consultative practice for all of my UC Davis doctors because none of them will do it, but they'll send them to me.
Well, you're welcome to come to my
me.
office for a few hours, few days, few weeks.
Love it. Love it.
This is all possible. There are a lot of rules that we've come up with because we've been doing this 8.5 years with dosed medicine. In other words, I've not seen any patient in the last 8 years who I don't know what dose of what they're taking. But that requires a lot of follow-up, and that's a key. I mean, patients need more follow-up with a regular doctor taking pharmaceuticals. Patients need pharmaceutical. There are probably a lot of medications that a tenth the dose would be very effective. At their current dose has way too high of a toxicity. But it is not impossible at all. I mean, if anybody doubts the ability to have logical rules in treating doses of cannabis with patients, I encourage you to call before you come, but I encourage you to come and see how it's done. All of us can do it. There's nothing special about what I do other than I became obsessed for 8 years. But I want to share it, and people can learn it. I mean, I'm not the smartest person out there. It's not that complicated.
Well, and unfortunately, we are over time, so we can't take any more questions, but I hope you guys will be able to hang out for a little bit. Great, so please approach them and ask whatever questions you have. But thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.